Naya Ashwind had 2 hours before Lord Malvec's Ironcloaks reached the mountain pass, and the wolf pup screaming beneath the frozen shutter wasn't part of her escape plan. She'd been running for the better part of a day, counting footsteps to keep the terror caged behind her ribs. 3 weeks since her father signed the levy papers. 2 weeks since the marriage decree arrived with Malvec's wax seal, stamped in blood-red ink that smelled like rust and roses. One night since she'd bolted from the convoy during the blizzard and stumbled into this forgotten valley where the maps showed nothing but mountains and the word beware scrawled in faded script. Snow came down like knives, white-out thick, burying her tracks as fast as she laid them down. Good. The storm would buy her time, if it didn't kill her first. Her wrists still burned where the levy chains had been locked 3 weeks ago. Iron cuffs, cold as judgment, heavy as shame. They'd removed them only yesterday when the convoy stopped to water the horses. A courtesy, the lead Ironcloak had said, his smile thin and sharp. The Viceroy prefers his brides unmarked. Naya had smiled back, nodded, waited until the wind picked up and the snow turned the world into a wall of white chaos. Then she ran. Now her fingers were numb inside her wool gloves, her breath coming in ragged clouds that froze on her lips. The threadbare cloak she'd stitched herself 2 winters ago did nothing against the cold. Her skirts, heavy with ice and mud, dragged at every step like hands pulling her down. She'd lost feeling in her toes an hour ago. Her stomach was a hollow ache. The dried meat she'd stolen from the supply wagon was long gone. But she was free. Or she would be, if she survived the night. She'd been searching for shelter, anything with 4 walls and a roof, when the sound tore through the wind. Not the creak of ice-heavy pines or the hiss of snow against stone. A whimper. High, desperate, wrong. Naya stopped in her tracks, breath misting white. 20 paces ahead, barely visible through the curtain of snow, an old trapper's cabin hunched against the hillside. Dark, abandoned. The shutters hung loose on rusted hinges. One had fallen, pinning something small and dark beneath its weight. The shape moved, a flash of silver-gray fur, tiny paws scrabbling against ice. Amber eyes, wide with fear, locked onto hers. Wolf pup, no bigger than a sack of grain, half buried in slush, one leg trapped, shaking so hard its whole body trembled. Logic was a cold, sharp thing in her chest. Walk away. You're prey here, too. Every second you waste is a second Malvec closes the gap. Her father's voice echoed in her skull. The same lecture he'd given when she'd cried at her mother's funeral, when she'd stitched the neighbor's dog instead of letting it bleed out. Sentiment is a luxury, girl. Omegas who feel too much don't survive. The council had said the same when they shackled her wrists for the marriage caravan. Weak, soft, disposable. Lord Malvec will take you anyway, they'd said. For the treaty, for the land rights. For whatever political game nobles played with lives that weren't their own, she'd refused to sign the wedding contract. They'd signed it for her. The pup whined again, smaller now, fading. Naya cursed under her breath and dropped to her knees. Her fingers were clumsy, stiff with cold, as she dug into the snow. The shutter was heavier than it looked, warped wood and frozen hinges biting into her palms. She braced her shoulder beneath it, shoved hard, felt something in her back scream in protest. The shutter lifted. The pup spilled free, stumbling sideways, dragging its injured paw. Blood smeared the snow beneath it, bright red against white. Naya didn't think. She lunged, scooped the shaking creature into her arms, pressed it against her chest. The heartbeat hammering under matted fur felt like a drum against her sternum, fast, frantic, alive. "I've got you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You're safe. I've got you." The pup stilled. Its breathing slowed, just a fraction. Those amber eyes blinked up at her, and for one impossible moment, the world went silent. No wind, no snow hiss, no distant shouts of Ironcloak hunters. Nothing. Just the 2 of them, and the weight of 100 unseen gazes pressing down from the forest. Naya's skin prickled. The hair on the back of her neck rose. She turned slowly, still clutching the pup, scanning the tree line. The trees were full of eyes. Wolves, dozens of them, maybe more. Ringing the clearing in perfect, unnatural silence, every face turned outward like soldiers on a wall, not watching her, guarding her, her breath caught. She stumbled backward toward the cabin, boots sliding on ice, pulse roaring in her ears. The door. She needed the door. It swung open under her hand, unlocked. Dark inside, but not cold. She crossed the threshold, slammed the door shut, threw the bolt with shaking hands. Her legs gave out. She sank to the floor, Pup still clutched to her chest, and only then did she notice. The hearth was burning. Fresh flames, crackling bright, casting orange light across rough-hewn walls. Smoke curled upward through a chimney she hadn't seen from outside. Heat rolled toward her in waves, blessed and impossible. She hadn't lit it, and hanging from a nail above the mantel, meat. A rabbit, skinned and clean, still dripping onto the stone hearth. She hadn't hung that either. Naya's throat tightened. She forced herself to breathe, to think. Footprints tracked across the dusty floor. Wolf prints. Dozens of them, crisscrossing, circling, layered one atop another like a map of restless movement. But none coming through the door. None crossing the threshold. Her hands shook as she stroked the pup's damp fur. It whimpered softly, nestling closer to her warmth. The cut on its paw wasn't deep, but it would need tending. She'd need water, cloth, something to bind it with, later. First, she needed to understand where she was. Outside, through the cracked shutter, she saw them more clearly now. The wolves. 100 strong, maybe more, forming concentric rings around the cabin. Every head turned outward. Every muscle taut. Sentries, not predators. Their formation was too perfect, too deliberate to be natural. This was military discipline. And walking through their ranks, slow and deliberate, came the largest wolf she'd ever seen. Black as midnight, scarred muzzle, one ear torn, body thick with muscle and old battles. Eyes like molten gold, glowing in the dim light of the storm. It dragged something heavy behind it, a stag, fresh killed, steam rising from the carcass in the freezing air. The wolf stopped at her door, lowered the stag across the threshold like an offering, then bowed its head. Naya's heart hammered against her ribs. The pup in her arms whimpered, a soft, almost reverent sound. The black wolf's eyes met hers through the gap in the shutter, and it began to shift. Bone cracked like thunder. Fur rippled, dissolved, reformed. Steam poured off its body in waves as muscle and sinew twisted, stretched, reshaped. The sound was wet, violent, impossible, until a man knelt where the wolf had been, tall, broad-shouldered, battle-scarred, with ink crawling up his forearms in patterns she didn't recognize. His chest was bare, skin marked with old wounds, some silver with age, others still pink and healing. Snow clung to his dark hair, melting in the firelight that somehow reached through the door's cracks. And his eyes, still that impossible, burning gold, fixed on her with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. He raised one hand, palm flat, fingers spread, and pressed it to his throat in a gesture older than language. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough, like gravel scraped over stone. "You saved the pup. It wasn't a question. Naya couldn't speak, couldn't move, could barely breathe." The man's gaze dropped to the trembling creature in her arms. Something flickered across his face, surprise, relief, something deeper she couldn't name. When he looked back at her, the corner of his scarred mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. Outside, the 100 wolves remained perfectly still, their formation unbroken, their eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. Waiting. Naya stared at the man kneeling in the snow, her mind struggling to catch up with what her eyes had just witnessed. Bone and sinew reshaping, fur dissolving into skin, the impossible made flesh. The stag lay across the threshold between them, still steaming in the frozen air. Its throat had been torn clean, a kill both brutal and precise, an offering. The man didn't rise. He remained on one knee, head slightly bowed, his breath forming clouds in the darkness. When he lifted his gaze to meet hers through the cracked shutter, those gold eyes held no threat. Only a strange, patient stillness. He raised his right hand slowly, palm flat and open, and pressed it against his throat. The gesture was deliberate, ceremonial. His fingers splayed wide before he moved his hand outward in a sweeping arc, ending with his palm facing upward. Peace given, not owed. Naya's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd heard stories of the old shifter customs, fragments of tales her grandmother had whispered before the council outlawed such talk, sign language older than written words, rituals that predated kingdoms. But she'd never expected to see one performed in front of her by a naked man who'd been a wolf moments before. The pup in her arms squirmed, letting out a soft, almost eager whine. Its tail wagged weakly. The man's expression shifted. His scarred features, hard and weathered as carved stone, gentled. He looked at the pup the way a soldier might look, at a fallen comrade found alive against all odds. "You saved him," the man said again, his voice rough with disuse. Each word seemed carefully chosen, as if speaking were an effort. "The runt of the winter litter. We thought him lost when the convoy passed through." "Convoy?" The word sent ice through Naya's veins. "Malvec's convoy," she whispered. The man's jaw tightened. Yes, she should have known. Should have realized that Lord Malvec's hunters wouldn't have traveled these mountain passes without disturbing something. Someone. "They shot at us," the man continued, rising slowly to his full height. He was tall, easily a head above most men she'd known, with broad shoulders that bore the marks of countless fights. Scars crisscrossed his chest and arms, some old and silver, others pink and recent. Crossbow bolts with iron tips. The pup panicked and ran. By the time we drove them off, the storm had scattered his scent. Naya glanced down at the trembling creature in her arms. He couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, barely weaned. His silver-gray fur was matted with melted snow and blood from the cut on his paw. He was trapped, she heard herself say. Under the shutter. I couldn't just leave him. Something flickered across the man's face. Surprise, perhaps. Or respect. "No," he said quietly. "You couldn't." The wind howled through the valley, driving snow against the cabin walls. The man didn't seem to feel the cold, despite standing bare-skinned in the blizzard. He turned his head slightly, and Naya saw the wolves behind him shift in response. The movement was synchronized, precise. Dozens of wolves adjusting position as one, forming tighter arcs around the cabin. Not a chaotic pack, but a disciplined unit. Military formations. Her breath caught. She'd heard the stories, dismissed them as legends meant to frighten children, tales of the Wolf King who commanded armies, the Alpha who'd held the northern ridge against 3 kingdoms, the Shifter Lord who'd vanished into the mountains after the Treaty of Broken Chains, taking his pack with him. Cale Draven. "You're him," she whispered, "the Alpha King." He didn't confirm or deny it. He simply watched her, those gold eyes unblinking. "And you," he said, tilting his head slightly, "are the Omega Lord Malvec means to call her." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "I won't go back," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'd rather freeze in these mountains than become his political ornament." Cale's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "Then we have that in common. Neither of us bows to the Viceroy's leash." He moved then, bending to grip the stag's antlers. With a single fluid motion, he dragged the carcass fully onto the threshold, positioning it so she could reach it from inside without opening the door completely. "For you and the pup," he said. "There's enough meat to last several days if you smoke it." Naya stared at the offering, her throat tight. When was the last time anyone had given her something without demanding payment or servitude in return? Why? The word escaped before she could stop it. Cale straightened, and for the first time she saw him wince. Just a flicker, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. His left hand moved to his ribs, pressing briefly against his side before dropping away. "You saved one of mine," he said simply. "That earns protection." He turned to leave, and that's when Naya saw it, the wound along his flank, partially hidden by shadows and the angle of his body. A ragged tear, edges dark with dried blood, cutting from his lowest rib down across his hip. An iron cloak blade had done that. Recent, within the last few hours. He was hiding the pain, but she'd stitched enough wounds in her life to know a serious injury when she saw one. Without treatment, without proper binding, he'd tear it open again the moment he shifted. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. A healer who turns away from wounds carries those deaths on her hands. "Wait," she said. Cale paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "You're hurt." She shifted the pup carefully, rising on unsteady legs. Her body screamed in protest, muscles stiff from cold and exhaustion, but she forced herself upright. "That wound on your side. If you shift again without binding it properly, you'll bleed out." His expression remained neutral. "It will heal." "Not fast enough." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I'm a seamstress. I've stitched flesh before. Let me help you." For a long moment he simply looked at her. Those gold eyes seemed to pierce through every defense, seeing things she'd tried to keep buried. Then, slowly, he nodded. "The pup needs tending as well," he said. "His paw." "I know." Cale moved toward the door, and the wolves around the cabin shifted again, creating a corridor through their ranks. He stepped across the threshold, and Naya realized how truly massive he was. The doorframe seemed too small for him. His presence filled the cabin, making the rough space feel suddenly cramped. She set the pup down gently near the hearth, where the warmth would help him, then turned to face Cale. Up close, the wound looked worse. The edges were clean, the work of a sharp blade, but deep. It would need thorough cleaning before she could stitch it. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the wooden stool near the fire. He obeyed without argument, lowering himself carefully. In the firelight she could see more scars, burns on his forearms, claw marks across his shoulders, a puckered circle on his chest that looked like an old arrow wound. This was a man who'd survived wars. Naya pulled her sewing kit from her pack, the leather case worn smooth from years of use. Inside, needles, thread, a small flask of alcohol she'd stolen from the convoy's medical supplies, and a bone-handled blade her mother had given her. She poured water from her canteen into a dented tin cup and set it near the fire to warm. Then she knelt beside Cale, examining the wound more closely. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "It already does." She cleaned the wound first, using the warmed water and a strip torn from her spare shirt. Cale didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, even when she had to press hard to clear away dried blood and debris. His breathing remained steady, controlled. The stitching took longer. Her fingers were still numb from the cold, clumsy at first, but muscle memory took over. She worked quickly, efficiently, the way her mother had taught her. Small, tight stitches that would hold even under strain. Cale watched her work in silence. Outside, the wolves remained motionless, their formation unbroken. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of them through the window, eyes reflecting the firelight. Watching. Waiting. "They're well-trained," she said quietly, threading another stitch. "They're family," Cale corrected. "Every wolf out there has chosen to follow. I don't command loyalty. I earn it." She tied off the thread, cutting it clean with her blade. "And the formations? The discipline? Survival requires structure. The Ridge taught us that. Or we died." Naya reached for a clean strip of cloth, binding the wound carefully. "Is it true what they say, that you held 3 kingdoms at bay during the war? 2 kingdoms and a republic?" His voice held a hint of dark humor. "The 3rd kingdom had the sense to negotiate." She finished the binding and sat back on her heels, studying her work. It would hold. Long enough for his shifter healing to take over, at least. "Thank you," Cale said. She nodded, moving to the pup. The cut on his paw was shallow, easily cleaned and wrapped. The little creature licked her fingers as she worked, his tail wagging weakly. When she finished, she found Cale standing by the window, fully dressed now in dark leather and worn wool he must have retrieved from one of the wolves. He stared out into the storm, his expression unreadable. "They'll come for you," he said quietly. "Malvec doesn't surrender his possessions easily." "I'm not his possession." "He believes you are. That's what matters." Naya stood, wrapping her arms around herself. The fire warmed the cabin, but cold fear had settled in her bones. "What will you do?" she asked. Cale turned to face her. "My pack holds this valley. Any who enter without permission answer to us." He paused, then added, "That includes Malvec's hunters." It wasn't quite a promise of protection, but it was close. "Why?" she asked again. Why protect me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. You saved the pup when you could have walked away. When walking away would have been safer, smarter, easier. His gold eyes held hers. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Before she could respond, he moved to the door. Sleep if you can. My wolves will keep watch. He stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. Through the window, she watched him walk to the center of the wolf formation. They closed ranks around him, a living wall between her and whatever darkness the night held. Naya sank down beside the pup, her hands shaking with delayed shock. She'd fled a forced marriage and stumbled into a myth, found herself under the protection of the legendary Alpha King and his 100 wolves. The pup crawled into her lap, curling against her warmth. His heartbeat steadied, matching the rhythm of her own. Outside, the blizzard howled, the fire crackled, the wolves kept their silent vigil. And then, cutting through the storm like a blade through silk, came the sound that turned her blood to ice. A horn. Long, low, unmistakable. Iron cloaks. Malvec's hunters. Entering the valley, the horn's echo died slowly, swallowed by wind and distance. Naya stood frozen by the window, the pup clutched against her chest, watching as the wolves outside shifted position. Their movements were fluid, coordinated, each animal sliding into a new formation without sound or hesitation. Kale appeared at the door. He didn't knock, simply pushed it open and stepped inside. His face was grim, jaw set in a hard line. "They're here," he said. "How many?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. 30, maybe more. Moving in tight formation through the pass. His gold eyes met hers. "They're carrying blades I can smell from here. Bane resin. Poison to my kind. Wolfsbane." She'd heard of it, the plant that burned shifter blood like acid. Hunters used it to coat their weapons, turning simple cuts into death sentences. "They're hunting me," she whispered. Yes. The single word carried no judgment, only fact. Outside, the wolves had formed 3 concentric rings now, each facing outward in overlapping arcs. The formation reminded her of illustrations she'd seen in old military texts. Defensive positions designed to repel attackers from any direction. "Will you fight them?" she asked. Kale's expression darkened. "If they attack, yes, they will. Malvec doesn't make empty threats." He nodded slowly, as if he'd already known the answer. "Then we prepare." He moved to the window, studying the approaching torchlight visible through breaks in the storm. Naya counted 6 lights, growing closer with each passing minute. "Stay inside," Kale said. "No matter what happens, don't open this door unless I tell you it's safe. I'm not helpless." He glanced at her, something like respect flickering in his gaze. "I know. You stitched me up without hesitation. But these men are trained killers, and their weapons can't hurt you the way they can hurt us." Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. Naya set the pup down near the hearth and moved back to the window. Through the cracked shutter, she watched Kale rejoin his pack. He shifted mid-stride, the transformation faster this time. Bone and muscle flowing like water until the black wolf stood where the man had been. He threw his head back and howled, a sound that resonated through the valley like rolling thunder. The pack answered, 100 voices rising in harmony, turning the night into a symphony of warning and challenge. The torchlight stopped advancing. Minutes crawled past. The wind drove snow against the cabin walls. The fire crackled behind her, throwing dancing shadows across the floor. Then the attack came. No warning, no shouted commands. Just sudden, violent motion as ironclad soldiers burst through the tree line in a disciplined wedge formation. They wore burnished armor, the metal catching torchlight, making them look like demons emerging from hell. Each carried a short sword, the blades gleaming with an oily greenish sheen. Bane resin. The wolves hit them like a wave against a seawall. Naya watched, horrified and mesmerized, as the battle unfolded. The wolves moved with terrifying coordination, striking from multiple angles, forcing the iron cloak wedge to fracture. But the hunters were skilled, fighting back to back, their blades finding fur and flesh with brutal efficiency. A wolf fell, dark blood staining snow. Then another. Kale was everywhere at once, a black blur of fury and precision. He took down 2 men in rapid succession, his jaws closing on armor joints where the metal couldn't protect. But there were so many, and the bane resin was taking its toll. She saw the blade coming before Cale did. A soldier, larger than the others, broke through the wolf line. He swung his sword in a wide arc, and Kyle twisted to avoid it, but not fast enough. The blade caught him across the ribs. Green-black liquid traced along the cut. Cale stumbled, his legs buckling. The veins beneath his dark fur began to glow with the same sickly color, spreading outward from the wound like cracks in glass. His shift flickered. Fur rippled, became skin, became fur again. His body couldn't hold its shape, the poison disrupting the transformation. Naya's breath stopped. 2 wolves grabbed the soldier who'd struck Cale, dragging him away from their alpha. His screams cut through the night, then went abruptly silent. But Cale was down, his breathing labored, his body twitching with aborted shifts. The poison was spreading faster than his healing could compensate. The remaining Ironcloak soldiers began to retreat, dragging their wounded with them. The wolves pursued, harrying them back toward the tree line, but several broke off to form a protective circle around Cale. Naya didn't think. She threw open the door and ran. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Snow immediately soaked through her skirts, weighing her down, but she pushed forward. The wolves parted to let her through, their eyes glowing in the darkness. Cale lay in the snow, his form stuck halfway between wolf and man. His breathing was shallow, rapid. The veins beneath his skin pulsed with that terrible green-black light creeping toward his heart. "Cale," she gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. "Can you hear me?" His eyes opened, gold fading to amber, then back to gold. His jaw worked, trying to form words, but only a low whine emerged. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced it down. Think. She needed to think. The rune note. Yesterday, while exploring the cabin, she'd noticed something burned into the stone of the mantel. She'd dismissed it as decoration, scorch marks from an old fire, but now the image came back with crystal clarity. Symbols. 3 of them, arranged in a triangle with words carved beneath in an old script. Bearberry, king's moss, pine pitch, a trapper's remedy. For poison. She looked around desperately. The cabin was 50 feet away. Could she drag him that far? He was massive, easily twice her weight. "Help me," she said to the wolves surrounding them. 2 of them moved immediately, positioning themselves on either side of Cale's half-shifted form. They nudged him, trying to get him to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. "All right," Naya muttered. "We do this the hard way." She hooked her arms under Cale's shoulders and pulled. Her back screamed in protest. Her feet slipped on ice. But inch by inch, she dragged him toward the cabin, the 2 wolves pushing from behind. By the time they reached the door, her muscles were burning, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She pulled him inside and kicked the door shut, then collapsed beside him, chest heaving. No time to rest. She scrambled to the hearth, studying the burned symbols more carefully. Yes, 3 remedies. 3 ingredients. Bearberry for blood cleansing, king's moss for poison draw, pine pitch for binding. But where would she find them in the middle of a blizzard? Her eyes fell on the rabbit carcass hanging above the mantel. Hunters always carried remedies. They had to, in case their own poisoned blades cut them by accident. She pulled the rabbit down, examining it more closely. Small leather pouches hung from the same nail, hidden behind the meat. She tore them open with shaking fingers. Dried berries, dark red. Bearberry, greenish fibrous material that smelled like earth and rain. King's moss, and a small clay jar sealed with wax. She broke it open. Thick, amber resin. Pine pitch. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by cold dread. She knew what these ingredients were, but not how to use them. Not the ratios, not the preparation method. She looked at Cale. His breathing had become even shallower. The green-black veins had reached his chest now, creeping toward his heart with each pulse. She didn't have time to figure out perfect ratios. She worked quickly, crushing the berries in her tin cup with the handle of her knife, adding the moss, tearing it into fine strands, mixing in the pine pitch until it formed a thick, dark paste that smelled sharp and medicinal. Cale's eyes had closed. His chest barely rose and fell. "No," Naya said fiercely. "You don't get to die. Not after I stitched you up. Not after you protected me." She scooped paste onto her fingers and smeared it directly over the wound on his ribs. The reaction was immediate. The paste sizzled, steam rising from the contact point. The green-black veins around the wound began to recede, pulling back like living things. But it wasn't enough. The poison had spread too far, too deep into his system. She needed to get it out of his blood. Her hands moved to his jaw, forcing his mouth open. His teeth were sharp, caught between human and wolf. She scooped more paste onto her fingers and pushed it past his teeth, onto his tongue. "Swallow," she commanded. "Kyle, you have to swallow." His throat worked weakly. Once. Twice. The paste disappeared. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then his whole body convulsed. Naya jerked back as Cale's spine arched, his limbs thrashing. The wolves outside began to howl, a sound of pure anguish that rattled the cabin's walls. The pup by the fire whimpered, crawling into the corner. Black-green liquid poured from Kyle's mouth, thick and reeking of rot. His shift completed suddenly, fully human now, naked and shaking on the cabin floor. The veins beneath his skin still glowed, but dimmer now, the poison slowly being expelled. But his breathing had stopped. Naya's medical training, such as it was, came from necessity. She'd stitched wounds, set broken bones, helped deliver calves when the village healer was too drunk to work. But she'd never performed resuscitation on a full-grown man dying from magical poison. She pressed her hands against his chest, finding the right position over his sternum. Then she pushed down hard using her full weight. 1, 2, 3, 4. His chest didn't rise. She kept counting, kept pushing, her arms burning with effort. 15, 16, 17. Outside, the wolves' howling intensified, becoming a physical force that shook icicles from the eaves. 28, 29, 30. She tilted his head back, pinched his nose, and breathed into his mouth. Once, twice. His lips were cold against hers. Back to compressions. Harder now, desperate. 1, 2, 3. His chest still didn't move on its own. Tears froze on her lashes. Her breath burned in her throat. But she didn't stop. 15. 16. "Come on," she gasped. "Come on, damn you." 30. She breathed for him again, tasting blood and bitterness. Compressions. 1, 2, 3. And then, on the fourth push, his chest bucked. Cale's eyes flew open. He rolled onto his side, coughing violently, expelling more of that black-green poison onto the floor. It pooled around him, steaming in the cold air, before slowly fading to nothing. His breathing resumed, ragged, painful, but breathing. Naya sat back, her whole body shaking. Outside, the wolves' howling transformed, becoming something triumphant, primal, a rolling wave of sound that shook the valley, making the very trees tremble. Cale's hand found hers in the darkness. His grip was weak but steady. "Thank you," he rasped. She couldn't speak, could only nod, tears streaming freely now. He pushed himself up slowly, wincing with every movement. The wound on his ribs was already healing, the stitches she'd placed doing their work. The poison had been expelled, his shifter healing taking over now that the bane resin was gone. "You saved my life," he said, his voice stronger now. "You saved mine first," she managed. He looked at her with those gold eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. Outside, the wolves had gone quiet. The storm continued to rage, but there was a new tension in the air, a waiting quality. Then, cutting through the silence like a knife, came another sound. A horn, longer this time, lower, more ominous, and beneath it the rhythmic tramp of many boots in snow. Cale's expression hardened. He moved to the window and Naya joined him. Through the storm she saw new torchlight, not 6 lights this time, dozens. And at their center, riding a black horse, a figure in robes the color of old blood, the witch priest. Malvec's hunters had returned, and they'd brought reinforcements. Naya stared down at Cale's still form, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes told her. His chest didn't rise, his lips had gone pale. The green-black veins beneath his skin still pulsed weakly, but his heart had stopped beating. No. The word rang through her mind like a bell. She'd watched her mother die from fever when she was 12, helpless to do anything but hold her hand. She'd seen her grandmother fade slowly over 2 winters, breath by breath, until one morning she simply didn't wake. She'd learned early that death was final, absolute, unchangeable. But this was different. Cale Draven had taken a poisoned blade meant to kill him, protecting territory that wasn't even his, had offered shelter to a stranger fleeing a forced marriage, had stood between her and 30 armed soldiers without hesitation. She would not let him die on a cold cabin floor while his wolves howled their grief outside. Naya pressed her fingers to his throat, searching for a pulse. Nothing. His skin was still warm, but growing cooler with each passing second. She'd gotten the poison out, but too late. The damage was done. Unless the memory surfaced from years ago. A traveling physician had passed through her village, teaching basic field medicine to anyone who would listen. She'd been 15, fascinated by the way he could bring people back from the edge. He'd shown them a technique, brutal and exhausting, for when the heart stopped, compressions, breathing, forcing the body to remember how to live. She positioned her hands over Cal's sternum and pushed down hard. His ribs flexed under her palms. Once, twice, 3 times. She counted out loud, her voice steady despite the panic screaming through her veins. 1, 2, 3, 4. The pup whimpered from his corner by the fire. Outside, the wolves had gone eerily silent, as if they sensed their alpha teetering on the edge. 15, 16, 17. Her arms burned. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold. She kept pushing, kept counting, refusing to stop. 28, 29, 30. She tilted his head back, pinched his nose and breathed into his mouth. His lips were cold against hers. She gave him 2 breaths, watching for his chest to rise, then returned to compressions. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. His heart remained still. She pushed harder, faster, her breath coming in gasps now. The physician had said timing was everything, that the first few minutes were critical. How long had it been? 30 seconds? A minute? 15, 16. Outside, a single wolf howled, long and mournful. Then another joined it, and another, until the entire pack was singing their grief to the uncaring sky. The sound was primal, devastating. It shook the cabin walls, made the fire flicker, rattled something deep in Naya's chest that she didn't understand. 30. 2 more breaths, back to compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her vision blurred, tears froze on her lashes before they could fall. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Please, she whispered between compressions. Please don't die. Not like this. Not because of me. The words became a rhythm, matching her compressions. Please don't die. Please don't die. Please don't die. On the 28th compression, she felt it. A flutter beneath her palms. Faint, uncertain, but there. She didn't dare hope. Kept pushing. 29, 30. Another breath. And another. Back to compressions, but lighter now, gentler, giving his heart room to remember its purpose. 1, 2, 3. Cale's chest suddenly bucked violently beneath her hands. His eyes flew open, gold and wild and unfocused. He rolled onto his side, coughing, choking, expelling more of that horrible black-green poison onto the floor. It steamed in the cold air, thick and viscous and wrong. The wolves outside erupted. Their howls transformed from mourning to triumph, a rolling wave of sound that shook icicles from the eaves and made the very trees tremble. Snow fell from branches in great sheets. The cabin walls groaned with the force of it. Naya sat back on her heels, her whole body shaking. Relief crashed over her so hard she thought she might collapse. But she forced herself to stay upright, to watch Cale carefully for any sign he was slipping back. He coughed again, harder, bringing up more poison. The green-black light beneath his skin was fading now, receding toward the wound on his ribs. His body was fighting back, his shifter healing finally gaining ground now that his heart was beating again. "Kyle," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. "Can you hear me?" His gold eyes found hers. For a moment, he simply stared, as if trying to remember who she was, where he was, what had happened. Then awareness flooded back, and with it, pain. He winced, pressing a hand to his ribs. "You!" he rasped, his voice like gravel. "You brought me back." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. He pushed himself up slowly, wincing with every movement. The wound on his ribs was still visible, the stitches she'd placed holding, but the flesh around it was raw and inflamed. The poison had done damage that would take time to heal, even for a shifter. "How long?" he asked. "Your heart stopped. Maybe a minute, maybe less." Her voice shook. "I wasn't sure it would work. The physician who taught me said it didn't always work." Cale looked at her with something like wonder. "You saved my life. You saved mine first," she said, echoing her earlier words. He reached out, his hand finding hers. His grip was weak but steady. "Twice now," he said. "The pup, and then me. You keep choosing to save wolves when you should run." "Maybe I'm tired of running." Something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. Outside, the wolves had settled into a watchful silence, but Naya could feel their presence like a physical weight, pressing against the cabin walls. Cale stood, moving carefully, testing his limits. The wound on his ribs pulled with each breath, but he didn't complain. He moved to the window, looking out at his pack. "They felt it," he said quietly, "when my heart stopped. The pack bond, it connects us all. They knew I was dying." Naya joined him at the window. The wolves had reformed their defensive rings, but their posture was different now, more alert, more tense. "What is the pack bond?" she asked. "Connection, deeper than blood, stronger than loyalty. When you lead wolves, you carry their hearts with yours. And they carry yours with theirs." He glanced at her. "They felt you save me. They know what you did." Before she could respond, something creaked beneath her foot. She looked down. The floorboard she was standing on had shifted slightly, revealing a gap in the wood. "What is that?" Cale asked. Naya knelt, pressing her fingers into the gap. The board lifted easily, as if it had been designed to be removed. Beneath it, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay 3 circular objects. She pulled one out carefully. It was a plate, but unlike any she'd seen before, made of silver-blue metal that seemed to glow faintly in the firelight. The surface was etched with spiraling patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if the design was moving even though it remained still. The moment her fingers touched it, the plate began to hum. Not a sound exactly, more of a vibration that resonated through her bones, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. Thump-thump. Thump-thump, thump-thump. Cale went very still. "Where did you find that?" "Under the floor." She turned the plate over, examining it. The patterns on the other side were different, more complex. Words were etched around the rim in a language she didn't recognize. "What is it?" He moved closer, staring at the plate with something like reverence. "A moon plate. I've only seen one once before in my grandfather's keeping. He said they were forged in the old times, before the kingdoms, before the treaties." His voice dropped. "Before wolves and humans forgot how to speak the same language." "What were they for?" "Oath-binding. Pack calling." The plates were kept in special places called oath houses, where shifters would come to swear loyalty. But more than that. He reached out, his finger hovering over the spiraling pattern without quite touching it. They responded to certain bloodlines. People who could steady beasts, who could make the wild things listen. The old texts called them hearkeners. The plate hummed louder in Naya's hands, the vibration intensifying. She almost dropped it, but something made her hold on. The rhythm was soothing, familiar, like a lullaby she'd forgotten. "This cabin," Cale said slowly, looking around with new eyes. "This is an oath house. That's why the wolves brought you here. That's why the fire was lit when you arrived, why there was food waiting. The place recognized you." Recognized me? That's impossible. I'm nobody. Just an Omega seamstress who ran from a wedding. You saved a wolf pup when logic said to leave it. You stitched a shifter king without fear. You brought me back from death with nothing but your hands and your will. His gold eyes met hers, intense. You carry their pulse, Naya Ashwind, the Harkonnen bloodline. Your grandmother, your mother. How far back does your line go? She thought back. Her grandmother had told stories before the council made her stop. Stories of women in their family who could calm wild horses with a touch, who could make war dogs gentle as lambs, who could walk through wolf territory without fear. She'd always thought they were just stories. My grandmother, she whispered. She used to say our family had a gift, but the council called it dangerous. They made us hide it, pretend we were normal. Normal! Kale laughed, but there was no humor in it. There's nothing normal about what you are. The Harkonnens were revered once. Before the purges, before the fear. They were the bridge between wild and tame, beast and human. The moonplate's humming reached a peak, then slowly faded to a gentle pulse that matched her heartbeat exactly. Naya carefully set it down and pulled out the other two plates. They responded the same way, humming in harmony with each other and with her. What do I do with them? She asked. Before Kale could answer, the sound cut through the night. A horn. Long, low, ominous. But not the same horn as before. This one was deeper, resonating with a frequency that made Naya's teeth ache, and beneath it a new sound, the rhythmic tramp of many boots in snow, the jingle of armor, the low murmur of voices chanting in unison. Kale moved to the window, his body tensing. They're back. Naya joined him, peering out into the darkness. Through the trees, she saw torchlight, dozens of torches, maybe more, forming a line that stretched across the entire valley entrance. And at their center, riding a black horse draped in crimson cloth, a figure in robes the color of old blood. The figure raised something in the air, and even from this distance, Naya could see it glow. A branding iron, white-hot and pulsing with unnatural light. The witch priest, Kale said, his voice flat. Malvek's spiritual advisor. He carries iron blessed by the old churches, forged to break a shifter's will. He looked at Naya, and for the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. If he marks me with that, I won't be able to shift, won't be able to lead. The pack will fracture without an alpha. Then we don't let him mark you. Naya, there are 50 soldiers out there, maybe more. And the priest has powers I don't understand. My pack is strong, but we're wounded. Half of us are carrying injuries from the first assault. She looked down at the moonplates, still humming softly on the floor. An idea formed, wild and dangerous, but it was all she had. You said these plates respond to Harkonnens, that they were used for pack calling. Yes, but then we use them. If I can make the wolves move together, fight together with perfect coordination, maybe we can break their line before the priest reaches you. Kyle stared at her. You've never used them before. You don't know what you're doing. No, she agreed. But I'm going to try anyway. Outside, the chanting grew louder. The torches began to advance, moving in perfect formation. The witch priest raised his branding iron higher, and its glow intensified, turning the falling snow red. Naya picked up one of the moon plates, feeling its weight in her hands. The humming resonated through her entire body now, matching not just her heartbeat but something deeper, her breath, her pulse, the rhythm of her blood. Tell me what to do, she said. Kale's expression shifted, hardening into something fierce and determined. The plates respond to intent and rhythm. You tap out a pattern, and the wolves feel it through the pack bond. But it's dangerous. If you push too hard, you could break their minds. If you're not clear enough, they'll hesitate. And hesitation in battle means death. I understand. He moved beside her, his hand covering hers on the plate. Start with your heartbeat. Let them feel you first. Then build from there. 3 beats for advance, 2 for retreat, 4 for circle, and protect. Naya nodded, her mouth dry. Outside, the Ironcloak soldiers were less than 100 yards away now. She could see their faces in the torchlight, grim and determined. She closed her eyes, feeling for the rhythm inside her chest. Thump thump, thump thump. Then she tapped it out on the moonplate with her fingertips. The response was immediate. Every wolf in the clearing lifted its head as one, ears forward, eyes glowing. She felt them, felt their presence like 1,000 invisible threads connecting her to each individual animal. Their fear, their loyalty, their fierce, burning need to protect their alpha. And they felt her, the seamstress who saved the pup, the human who brought their king back from death, the hearkener who held their ancient oath plates. "They're listening," Kale whispered. "They're waiting for your command." Naya opened her eyes, watching the approaching soldiers through the window. The witch priest had begun to chant louder, his voice carrying across the snow. The branding iron blazed like a small sun, and wherever its light touched, the snow melted, leaving scorched earth behind. She tapped the moonplate again. 3 steady beats. Advance. The wolves moved as one, flowing forward through the snow like a dark tide. Their formation shifted, tightening, becoming a spear aimed directly at the Iron Cloak line. The soldiers faltered, their perfect formation cracking slightly. The witch priest's chant grew frantic. He spurred his horse forward, the branding iron raised high. "He's coming for me," Kale said, "for the pack bond. If he breaks it, the wolves will scatter." "Not if I break his line first." Naya tapped out a new rhythm, something that came from instinct rather than instruction. A complex pattern that spiraled outward like the designs on the plates. The wolves responded instantly. They split into 3 groups, each moving in a different direction, circling the Iron Cloak formation from multiple angles. The soldiers spun, trying to cover all approaches at once, and in their confusion, gaps opened in their defense. The witch priest shouted something in a language Naya didn't recognize. The branding iron flared brighter, and suddenly the ground between him and the cabin was clear of wolves, as if an invisible wall had pushed them back. He kicked his horse into a gallop, charging straight toward the cabin door. Toward Kale. "He's too fast," Kale said, already moving toward the door. "I have to meet him outside. Have to keep him away from you." "No." Naya grabbed his arm. "You're still hurt. One touch from that iron and you're finished." "Then what do you suggest?" She looked at the 3 moon plates on the floor, an idea forming. A terrible, desperate idea. "Can you shift?" she asked. "Yes, but..." "Then shift and run. Lead him away from the cabin, away from me. Make him chase you." "That's suicide. Even wounded, that horse is faster than I am right now." "Not if the wolves slow him down." She picked up all 3 plates, cradling them against her chest. "And not if I come with you." His eyes widened. "Absolutely not. You'll freeze out there in minutes." "Then I'll freeze." She met his gaze steadily. "I didn't drag you back from death just to watch you walk into it again. We do this together, or we don't do it at all." Outside, the witch priest was 50 yards away. 40. 30. Kale's jaw tightened. Then he nodded once, sharp and final. "Stay behind me. And for the love of the old gods, don't drop those plates." He shifted mid-stride, clothes tearing as his body reformed into the massive black wolf. The wound on his flank pulled, bleeding fresh, but he didn't slow. Naya threw open the cabin door and ran into the night, the moonplates clutched against her chest, their humming so loud now it drowned out even her own fear. The witch priest saw them. His eyes, glowing the same unnatural red as his iron, locked onto Kale. He raised the iron high, chanting words of power that made the air shimmer and warp. Naya tapped the moonplates. A rapid, staccato rhythm that felt like drums in a war march. The wolves converged from all sides, slamming into the horse from multiple angles. The animal reared, screaming, throwing the witch priest from his saddle. He hit the snow hard but rolled to his feet, the branding iron still clutched in his hand. "Run!" Kale's voice echoed in her mind, though his mouth hadn't moved. The pack bond, letting him speak directly to her consciousness. "Into the trees, now!" she ran, her skirts tangling around her legs, the cold stealing her breath. Behind her she heard the witch priest's enraged scream, heard the sizzle as the branding iron touched one of the wolves, the animal's yelp of pain cut through her like a knife. She looked back. The witch priest was standing now, the iron held before him like a weapon. 3 wolves lay motionless in the snow around him, their fur smoking where the iron had touched them. The others had fallen back, circling but unwilling to get close enough to be burned. He turned toward Kale, who stood between him and Naya, hackles raised, teeth bared. "Alpha King?" the witch priest said, his voice cold and precise. "Lord Malvek sends his regards," and his collar. He lunged forward, the iron aimed directly at Kale's shoulder. Kale dodged, but not fast enough. His wounded flank slowed him down, made him clumsy. The iron grazed his foreleg, and even that brief contact made him howl in agony. He stumbled, his leg collapsing beneath him. The witch priest raised the iron for a finishing blow, and Naya, without thinking, without planning, stepped between them. The world slowed to a crawl. Naya saw the iron descending, saw its white-hot surface reflecting in the witch priest's cold eyes, saw Kyle trying to rise behind her but unable to make his wounded leg work. She raised the moonplates, holding them like a shield. The iron struck. The impact sent shockwaves through Naya's entire body. The moonplates screamed, a sound so high and piercing it shattered icicles from trees and made every wolf in the clearing flatten their ears. The metal vibrated so violently in her hands that she thought her bones might shake apart. But the iron didn't touch her. The plates had caught it, absorbed it, turned its burning heat into pure resonance that radiated outward in waves. Snow melted in a perfect circle around them. The ground steamed, and the witch priest stumbled backward, shock replacing the cold calculation in his eyes. "Impossible," he hissed. "You're human. You can't—" Naya didn't let him finish. She swung the plates, using them like a weapon, and when they connected with his chest, the sound was like thunder. The witch priest flew backward, landing hard in the snow 20 feet away. The branding iron tumbled from his hand, its glow flickering and dying as it hit frozen ground. For a moment, absolute silence filled the valley. Then Kale was beside her, shifted back to human form, his hand on her shoulder. "Are you hurt?" She looked down at herself, half expecting to see burns, injuries, but there was nothing. The plates had protected her completely. They were still humming in her hands, but the sound had changed. Gentler now, almost approving. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice shook. "But you're not." The wound on his leg was worse now, blackened where the iron had grazed him. He couldn't put weight on it without wincing. The witch priest was climbing to his feet, rage contorting his features. Behind him, the iron-cloaked soldiers had regrouped, forming a new line. More torches appeared from the trees. Reinforcements. They were outnumbered, wounded, running out of time. "Naya." Kal's voice was low, urgent. "There's one way to protect you. One way to make Malvek's claim invalid." "What?" "I claim you. Publicly, before witnesses." He gestured to the soldiers, the witch priest, the wolves. "If you're mine under shifter law, the marriage contract becomes void. Malvek can't force you to wed if you're already bound." The word hit her like a fist. Bound, claimed. Another cage, different bars but a cage nonetheless. "No," she said. His eyes widened. "Naya, listen." "No. I didn't run from one collar just to accept another." She gripped the moonplates tighter. "I won't be claimed. Not by Malvek, not by you, not by anyone." "Then what do you suggest? Because in about 30 seconds they're going to charge, and I can't protect you, and fight them both." She looked at him, this legendary Alpha King, wounded and desperate and trying to do what he thought was right. Then she looked at the wolves, arranged in their defensive formations, waiting for commands they trusted because she'd proven herself. And she understood. "Not claimed," she said. "Pacted." "What?" "You said the plates were for oath binding, so we bind an oath. Not ownership, not claiming, an alliance of equals." She met his gaze steadily. "I'll accept protection from you and your pack. In return, I use whatever this Harkonnen gift is to help you. Partners, not master and servant." Kale stared at her for a long moment. She could see the conflict in his eyes, centuries of tradition warring with something newer, something that recognized the rightness of what she was proposing. "An alpha doesn't kneel to anyone," he said slowly. "Then maybe," she said, "it's time that changed." Behind them, the witch priest had retrieved his iron. It was glowing again, building power. The soldiers were advancing, weapons drawn. "Choose," Naya said. "Quick!" Kyle's jaw worked. Then, slowly, deliberately, he dropped to one knee in the snow. The effect on the wolves was immediate and electric. Shock rippled through the pack like a physical wave. An alpha didn't kneel. Ever. It violated every instinct, every tradition, every understanding of how their world worked. But Kyle remained down, his head bowed, one fist pressed to his chest. "I, Kale Draven, Alpha King of the Northern Ridge, offer oath to Naya Ashwind." His voice rang clear across the valley. "Not as master to claimed, but as ally to ally. As equal to equal, my strength is yours, my pack is yours. And in return I ask only the same." Naya felt the weight of those words, felt them resonate through the moon plates with an intensity that made her gasp. This was ancient magic, old as mountains, deep as roots. This was how oaths were meant to be sworn, before kingdoms twisted them into chains. She knelt as well, facing him, the plates between them glowing so bright now they cast blue-white light across the snow. "I accept," she said, and the words felt like they came from somewhere deeper than her throat. "My skill is yours, my will is yours, and I ask the same. We stand together, or not at all." The moon plates exploded with light. Not heat, not fire, but pure resonance that pulsed outward in concentric rings. Every wolf in the clearing threw back its head and howled, a sound of recognition and acceptance. The oath was witnessed, the bond was formed, and when the light faded, something had changed. Naya could feel them, all of them, 100 wolves, each a distinct presence in her awareness. Their hearts beating in rhythm with hers, their breath matching her own. The pack bond, extended to include her not as possession but as kin. Kale rose, and she saw wonder in his eyes. "You feel it?" "Yes. That's not supposed to be possible. The bond only extends to blood-bonded shifters." "I'm a Harkener," she said, finally accepting it. "Maybe the rules are different for us." The witch priest's scream of rage shattered the moment. He charged forward, the branding iron raised, power crackling around him like lightning. "Enough of this heresy!" he shouted. "Lord Malvek will have his bride, and you will have your collar, Wolf King, even if I have to drag you both back in chains." Naya felt the pack bond thrumming with readiness. 100 wolves, waiting for her command. She raised the moon plates, and this time, she didn't tap out a rhythm. She drummed. A complex, layered pattern that spoke of coordinated attacks, of feints and flanking maneuvers, of using terrain and numbers to overwhelm a stronger opponent. The pattern poured out of her instinctively, as if generations of Harkeners before her were guiding her hands. The wolves moved like water flowing downhill, inevitable and precise. 3 split left, drawing half the Ironcloak soldiers away from formation. 5 more split right, forcing another group to break off to defend. The rest charged straight forward in a wedge, but at the last second, they parted like curtains, flowing around the witch priest instead of engaging him. Behind him, Kale had shifted, moving despite his wounded leg. He hit the priest from behind, jaws closing on the man's wrist. The branding iron flew from nerveless fingers, landing in the snow where its light extinguished with a hiss of steam. The priest howled, trying to shake Kale off, but the Alpha King's grip was iron. Blood poured from the wound, steaming in the frozen air. The Ironcloak soldiers, seeing their spiritual leader fall, faltered. Their formation, already disrupted by the wolves, collapsed entirely. Some ran. Others dropped their weapons, hands raised in surrender. Naya tapped out 2 beats on the plates. Retreat. The wolves fell back immediately, forming a protective circle around her and Kyle. The soldiers who'd surrendered were herded into a group, watched but not harmed. The ones who'd run disappeared into the trees, and the wolves let them go. Kale released the priest, who collapsed to the snow, clutching his ruined wrist. His robes were torn, his face pale with shock and blood loss. "Tell Malvek," Naya said, her voice carrying across the clearing, "that his bride is no longer available. Tell him I've chosen my path, and it doesn't include him." The priest glared up at her with pure hatred. "Lord Malvek doesn't accept rejection. He'll come for you himself. With armies. Then I'll be ready." She looked at the moon plates in her hands, at the wolves surrounding her, at Cale standing bloodied but unbowed at her side. "And I won't be alone." Cale shifted back to human form. He was favoring his wounded leg, and the graze from the branding iron had left an ugly mark, but he was alive. They both were. He turned to the surrendered soldiers. "You have a choice. Go back to Malvek empty-handed and face his wrath, or walk away from his service entirely. Find new lives in kingdoms that don't trade in forced marriages and slavery." Several of the soldiers exchanged glances. One, younger than the others, stepped forward. "If we walk away, he'll hunt us." "Then walk far enough that he can't find you," Cale said. "Head north past the ridge. There are settlements there, people who'll take you in. People who don't ask questions about your past." Another soldier, older, scarred, nodded slowly. "And if we choose that path, you won't stop us?" "No." The soldiers conferred in low voices. Finally, as a group, they began to strip off their armor. Metal clattered to the snow. Weapons were dropped. One by one, they walked away into the forest, heading north as Kyle had suggested. Only the witch priest remained, still clutching his wounded wrist. "Take him too," Naya said to the wolves. Two of them stepped forward, herding the priest to his feet. "Leave him at the forest edge with bandages and a torch. What he does after that is his choice." The wolves dragged the priest away. His curses echoed through the trees until distance swallowed them. Then silence fell, broken only by wind and the soft panting of exhausted wolves. Naya sank to her knees, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving her hollow and shaking. The moon plate slipped from her fingers, landing gently in the snow where they continued to hum softly. Cale knelt beside her. "You should be inside. It's too cold out here." "In a moment." She looked at him, really looked at him. Blood streaked his bare skin. His leg was still bleeding from where the iron had touched it, but his eyes were clear, alert, alive. "Does it hurt?" "Yes, but I've had worse." She almost laughed. "That's not reassuring." "Wasn't meant to be." He reached out, his hand cupping her face gently. His palm was warm despite the cold. "What you did tonight, with the plates, with the oath, that was extraordinary." "I didn't know what I was doing. I just acted." "That's what makes it extraordinary." His thumb brushed her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You saved us all." Again. The touch sent warmth flooding through her, chasing away the cold. She found herself leaning into it, craving that connection, that proof they were both still here, still breathing, still alive. His eyes darkened, gold deepening to amber. He leaned closer, and she realized with a start that he was going to kiss her. And she wanted him to. But before their lips could meet, a wolf's sharp bark cut through the moment. They both turned to see one of the sentries at the tree line, ears forward, attention fixed on something in the distance. Cale was on his feet instantly, shifting mid-rise. He loped to the sentry's position, and Naya followed on unsteady legs, the moonplates clutched to her chest. There, emerging from the trees on the far side of the valley, rode a single figure on horseback. Not iron cloaks, not soldiers. This horse was white as snow, draped in cloth of gold. And the rider wore armor that gleamed even in darkness, polished to a mirror shine. Lord Malvek had come himself, and behind him, visible now through breaks in the trees, marched what looked like an entire battalion. Hundreds of soldiers, war machines, siege equipment. This wasn't a hunting party anymore. This was an army. Cale shifted back, his expression grim. "We need to leave. Now. The pack can't hold against that many." "Where do we go?" "North. To the ridge. There are strongholds there. Places we can defend." He looked at her. "But it's 3 days' travel through mountain passes in this weather. With wounded wolves and—" He gestured to her thin clothes, her inadequate cloak. "I'll manage," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "You'll freeze before we reach the first pass." "Then I'll freeze." She met his eyes steadily. "I'm not going back to him, Cale. I'd rather die free than live in Malvek's cage." Something fierce and proud flashed across his face. You won't have to do either. We'll get you to the ridge alive and we'll find a way to end this." He turned to his pack, and even without words they understood. They began to move, gathering the wounded, forming up for a march. The youngest wolves surrounded the injured pup, creating a mobile nest to keep him warm during travel. Naya looked back one last time at the cabin. The oath house. The place where everything had changed. The fire still burned inside, visible through the window. A beacon in the darkness. "We'll come back," Kale said quietly. "When this is over. The oath houses are meant to be kept, not abandoned. If we survive, when we survive." He said it with such certainty that she almost believed him. The wolves formed a column, with Naya and Kale at the center, protected on all sides. Kale shifted, and she climbed onto his back, her fingers gripping his thick fur. 2 other wolves flanked them, close enough that their body heat helped ward off the cold. Behind them, Malvek's army continued to advance, torches turning the valley into a sea of flickering light. But ahead lay the mountains, the ridge, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to build something new, something better than cages and claims and forced marriages, something chosen. Kale began to run, and the pack moved with him, 100 wolves flowing through snow and darkness like ghosts. Naya clung to his back, the moonplate secured in her pack, the pack bond humming through her veins. She'd escaped one prison tonight. And with Kale beside her, with the wolves at her back, she'd make sure she never saw the inside of another, no matter what it took. The witch priest rose from the snow like something dragged up from the underworld, his ruined wrist cradled against his chest, his face twisted with rage that went beyond human emotion. Behind him, the forest had come alive with movement. More soldiers poured through the trees, dozens upon dozens, their armor gleaming dully in the pre-dawn light. These weren't the scattered remnants of a hunting party. This was a coordinated assault force, moving with the precision of veteran troops who'd trained together for years. Naya stood beside Kale at the cabin's threshold, her legs shaking with exhaustion, the moonplates heavy in her arms. The pack had reformed their defensive rings, but she could feel their fatigue through the bond. They'd been fighting all night. Wolves lay wounded in the snow, their blood dark against white. Others limped on injured legs, staying upright through sheer will alone. Kale shifted back to human form, swaying slightly as his wounded leg took his weight. "We can't hold another assault," he said quietly. "Not like this." "Then we don't hold," Naya replied. "We end it." Before he could respond, the witch priest raised his remaining hand. In his grip, a new staff had appeared, longer than the branding iron, carved from blackened wood that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. Symbols burned along its length, glowing the same sickly green as the poison that had nearly killed Kale. "You think your heretic oath changes anything?" The priest's voice carried across the clearing, amplified by magic that made it echo from every tree. "Lord Malvek's claim stands under kingdom law. Your shifter rituals mean nothing to human courts." "Then Malvek can petition his courts," Kale called back. "We're done with this conversation." The priest's laugh was cold and sharp as breaking ice. "You misunderstand, Wolf King. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to deliver Lord Malvek's justice." He slammed the staff into the ground. The symbols flared brilliant green, and suddenly the snow between them erupted upward in a wall of ice and frozen earth. The barrier cut through the wolves' formation, separating Naya and Kale from half their pack. Kale snarled, starting to shift, but the priest was faster. He pointed the staff directly at the Alpha King, and bands of green light wrapped around Kyle's body like chains, pinning his arms to his sides, locking his legs together. The transformation stuttered, caught between forms, trapping Kale in the agonizing space between wolf and man. "The branding iron was merciful," the priest said, walking forward slowly. From within his torn robes he drew a new implement. This one looked like a collar, made of the same blessed iron, but with spikes on the interior that would pierce the skin when closed. "This is correction. This is how we teach beasts their place." Naya's vision went red. She dropped the moonplates and lunged forward, but 2 soldiers had flanked her while she was focused on the priest. They grabbed her arms, wrenching them behind her back. pain shot through her shoulders as they forced her to her knees. "Hold her," the priest ordered. "Let her watch what happens to those who defy the natural order." He approached Cale, the collar held before him like an offering. The spikes gleamed, wickedly sharp, designed not just to control but to punish, to hurt. Cale struggled against the magical bonds, his muscles straining, but the green light held fast. Through the pack bond, Naya felt his rage and helplessness, felt the way his wolf side screamed to break free, to fight, to protect. The priest raised the collar, positioning it around Kyle's throat, and Naya understood with sudden clarity what would happen next. The collar would close, the spikes would bite deep. Cale would be broken, not killed but destroyed, reduced to something less than what he was. The pack would feel it through their bond and scatter, leaderless. She would be dragged back to Malvec and married in a ceremony orchestrated by this monster, and everything she'd fought for would mean nothing. No. The word rang through her mind like a bell. Not a thought, a decision. She threw her weight sideways, breaking the grip of one soldier, then slammed her head backward into the face of the other. She felt his nose crunch, heard his howl of pain, and then she was free, stumbling forward, running toward Cale and the priest. The priest saw her coming. He smiled, cold and triumphant, and redirected the collar's path. Toward her. Naya felt the heat before it touched her skin. The blessed iron radiated malice, centuries of hatred for anything wild or free, distilled into metal and purpose. She should have dodged, should have turned away. Instead, she threw her arm up to block it, accepting the burn to spare Cale the collar. The iron touched her forearm, and the world became pain. White-hot agony exploded through every nerve, every fiber of her being. The smell of burning flesh filled her nostrils. Her skin blackened and split under the metal's touch, smoke rising from the wound in thin gray ribbons. She heard herself scream, a sound torn from the deepest part of her throat, raw and primal and endless. But beneath her pain, something else stirred. The moon plates on the ground began to hum. Not the gentle pulse she'd felt before, but a violent, resonant vibration that made the earth shake. Snow jumped and danced around them. Icicles shattered and fell from trees like crystal rain. The wolves felt it. Every single one threw back their head and roared, a sound that was part howl, part battle cry, part something older and more terrible than either. The noise didn't just fill the valley. It became the valley. The trees trembled. The frozen ground cracked. Somewhere in the distance, an avalanche broke loose with a thunderous rumble. Cale's eyes, trapped in his half-shifted face, began to glow. Not the warm gold she'd grown familiar with, but a burning white gold that hurt to look at directly. The green chains binding him cracked, splintered, shattered into fragments that dissolved like morning mist. His shift completed in an instant, but it was wrong. Not fully wolf, not fully man. Something in between, larger than either form should allow, muscle and sinew wrapped in shadow and fury. His jaw elongated, filled with teeth that gleamed like knives. His hands became claws, each as long as a sword blade. The witch priest stumbled backward, his triumph turning to terror. Cale lunged. His clawed hand closed around the staff, and the blackened wood exploded into splinters with a sound like breaking thunder. The priest tried to run, but Cale was faster. He grabbed the man by his robes, lifted him effortlessly off the ground, and threw him. The priest's body flew through the air, over the heads of his soldiers, over the defensive line of wolves, and slammed into a tree trunk 20 yards away with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the snow and didn't move. Naya collapsed to her knees, clutching her branded forearm against her chest. The pain was beyond anything she'd imagined, beyond what she thought a body could endure and remain conscious. Through blurred vision, she saw more soldiers pouring into the clearing, filling gaps in their formation, surrounding them from all sides. They were going to die here. Then her vision focused on the moon plates lying just beyond her reach, still humming with that violent resonance. Their glow pulsed in time with her heartbeat, or maybe her heartbeat pulsed in time with them. She couldn't tell anymore where she ended and they began. Through the pack bond she felt the wolves waiting, watching. Ready to fight to the last, but confused by the chaos, unable to coordinate without clear direction. They needed leadership. They needed strategy. They needed her. Naya reached out with her uninjured hand, fingers stretching toward the nearest plate. Her branded arm screamed in protest, but she ignored it. Pain was information. Information could be used. She touched the plate, and it sang. Not hummed, not pulsed, sang, with a clarity and purpose that cut through her agony like light through darkness. And in that moment, she understood. The plates weren't just tools for communication, they were instruments, and she was meant to play them. Her eyes found a bone awl lying nearby, probably used by the trapper who'd once lived here to punch holes in leather. She grabbed it with her good hand, ignoring the way her injured arm hung useless at her side, and positioned the awl above the moonplate's surface. Around her, soldiers advanced in a tight wedge formation, shields raised, swords drawn. There were 50 of them, maybe more, disciplined, experienced, moving as one unit toward her and the wolves. But she had something they didn't. She had rhythm. Naya lifted the bone awl and tapped the moonplate once. A single, clear tone rang out across the valley, pure and perfect as a bell at sunrise. Every wolf in the clearing snapped its head toward her as one. 100 pairs of eyes locked onto her position, glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. The pack bond, already strong, suddenly intensified until she could feel each individual wolf as clearly as she felt her own heartbeat. The soldiers hesitated, their formation wavering. Naya tapped twice more, establishing a rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. The wolves began to move, not charging forward in a chaotic rush, not scattering in panic, moving with the same disciplined precision as the soldiers themselves, but faster, more fluid. They flowed around obstacles like water, each wolf knowing exactly where every other wolf would be, anticipating movements before they happened. She changed the rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Pause. Thump. The pack split into 3 groups, each taking a different angle of approach. The soldiers tried to adjust their formation to cover all 3 directions at once, and in doing so, created gaps in their defense. Naya saw those gaps through the eyes of the wolves, felt them like weak points in armor, and tapped out a new command. The wolves struck, not with mindless fury but with surgical precision. They hit the weak points in the formation simultaneously, collapsing the wedge from multiple directions at once. Soldiers fell, not dead but disarmed, overwhelmed by the sheer coordinated ferocity of the assault. Kale, still in his half-shifted form, fought at the center of it all. He moved through soldiers like smoke through fingers, too fast to track, too powerful to stop. Where his claws passed, shields split. Where his jaws closed, swords shattered. But more soldiers kept coming. The witch priest, recovered now, was shouting orders from his position by the tree. Fresh troops poured from the forest, replacing the fallen, tightening the noose. Naya's branded arm had gone numb, which was somehow worse than the pain. She couldn't feel her fingers, couldn't tell if the arm was still attached. Blood soaked through her sleeve, dripping onto the moonplate, and where the drops touched metal, the humming intensified. She tapped out a new rhythm, more complex, layered, multiple beats overlapping, creating harmonics that made the air shimmer. The wolves responded instantly, their movements becoming even more synchronized, more precise. They weren't a pack anymore. They were a single organism with 100 bodies, moving with one mind, one purpose. The soldiers' formation broke entirely. Some ran, others dropped their weapons in surrender. The witch priest's voice grew shrill, desperate as he tried to rally them. Then Kyle was there, looming over the priest, still trapped in that terrible in-between form that was more nightmare than nature. The priest raised his hands, trying to summon more magic, but Kale was faster. His clawed hand closed around the man's throat, lifting him off the ground. For a moment, Naya thought Kale would kill him, wanted him to with a fierce, dark part of herself that frightened her. But Kale's eyes found hers across the clearing. Those burning white gold eyes that saw too much, understood too much, and he set the priest down, not gently. The man collapsed to his knees, gasping, but alive. Run! Kale's voice was distorted, barely recognizable, but the command was clear. Tell Malvek that his bride chose her own path. Tell him that if he sends more soldiers, more priests, more hunters, we will break them all. Tell him that the North remembers how to fight." The priest scrambled backward, then turned and fled into the trees, his robes streaming behind him like blood on snow. The remaining soldiers needed no further encouragement. They dropped their weapons and ran, disappearing into the forest like ghosts at dawn. Silence fell over the clearing. The only sounds were the soft panting of exhausted wolves and the gentle hum of the moonplates. Naya tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. The bone awl slipped from her fingers. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel, darkness creeping in from the edges. She felt Kale beside her, shifting back to human form, his arms catching her before she hit the ground. His face swam in and out of focus above her. "Stay with me," he said, his voice rough. "Naya, stay with me." She wanted to tell him she was fine, that she'd managed, that they'd won, but the words wouldn't come. The brand on her forearm had stopped hurting, which meant something terrible she couldn't quite name. Through the pack bond, she felt the wolves gathering around them, forming a protective circle, felt their concern, their fear, their fierce determination to keep her safe. The moonplate still hummed softly, responding to her fading heartbeat. And as consciousness slipped away, Naya's last thought was that she'd found something worth dying for. Something worth living for, too, if she could just hold on long enough to see what came next. Naya woke to the smell of pine smoke and wolf fur. Her arm throbbed with a dull, persistent ache that told her she was alive, that she'd survived the branding, that her body was still trying to heal what had been burned into it. She opened her eyes slowly, squinting against pale morning light filtering through gaps in the cabin walls. She was lying near the hearth, wrapped in furs she didn't recognize, soft, well-tanned, bearing the scent of the pack. Her branded forearm had been carefully wrapped in clean linen, the bandages bound with a skill that suggested Kale's work. She could feel the heat radiating from the wound beneath the cloth, but the blinding agony had faded to something manageable. Kale sat by the window watching the valley. He'd shifted back to fully human form, dressed in worn leather and dark wool. The wounds he'd taken during the battle had healed, his shifter nature knitting flesh faster than any human could manage, but exhaustion lined his face. He hadn't slept. She could tell by the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes tracked every movement outside. "How long?" Her voice came out rough, scraped raw from screaming. He turned, and relief flooded his features. "2 days. You've been drifting in and out. The brand, it was blessed iron, took longer to stabilize than a normal burn. 2 days. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The world tilted sideways and her stomach lurched. Kale was beside her in an instant, his hand steady on her shoulder. "Easy, you lost blood. Pushed yourself beyond what your body could handle." His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have stepped in front of that collar. That was meant for me." "I know what it was meant for." She met his eyes, remembering the moment with crystalline clarity. The priest's triumphant smile. The collar descending toward Kale's throat. The choice that hadn't felt like a choice at all. "And I'd do it again." Something passed across his face, too complex to name. Gratitude, yes, but also frustration, fear, and beneath it all, something deeper that made her breath catch. "The pack felt what you did," he said quietly, "through the bond. They felt you take pain meant for their alpha, felt you use it, turn it into rhythm and coordination, felt you lead them to victory while your arm was still smoking." He paused, his hand still warm on her shoulder. "They're calling you Hearthkeeper now, the one who tends the flame, the one who holds the center while others fight. I didn't do it for titles. I know. That's why they gave you one anyway." Outside she could hear the pack moving, the soft pad of paws in snow, the occasional huff of breath. Through the bond, she felt their presence like a constant warmth in her chest. 100 wolves, each distinct, each connected to her in ways she was still learning to understand. "What happened to the soldiers?" she asked. "The ones who survived scattered. The witch priest made it back to Malvec's forces, but he won't be using magic again anytime soon. You shattered something in him when you blocked that branding iron with the moon plates." Kale's expression darkened. "Malvec himself retreated after the priest returned. But he'll come back. Men like him always do. Then we'll be ready." Will we? He studied her face. Naya, what happened out there? What you did with the plates? That was extraordinary, but it nearly killed you. And Malvek has armies, resources. The backing of kingdoms who'd rather see shifters collared than free. She pushed herself upright despite the protest from every muscle. Then we need allies. We need to rebuild the oath houses, find others with the Harkoner gift, teach wolves and humans to fight together again. The words came out with more certainty than she felt, but once spoken, they felt right. We need to become something Malvek can't break with armies or iron. Kale was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, moving to the loose floorboard where the moonplates still rested. He lifted one carefully, its surface reflecting the firelight. My grandfather told me stories, he said. Before the purges, before the fear. The oath houses stretched across the entire north, places where humans and shifters swore loyalty not through force but through choice, where Harkoners like you mediated disputes, coordinated defenses, kept the peace. He turned the plate over in his hands. That world died a long time ago. Maybe it can't be rebuilt. Or maybe, Naya said, slowly unwrapping the bandage on her arm, it's been waiting for someone stupid enough to try. The brand was ugly. The priest's iron had left a mark that would never fully fade. A twisting symbol burned deep into her flesh. But as she looked at it now, in the morning light, she saw something else. Not ownership, not a collar or a claim. A scar she'd chosen, a price she'd paid willingly. Evidence that she'd stood between a collar and freedom had won. She wrapped the bandage back carefully, then stood on unsteady legs. Kale moved to help her, but she waved him off. She needed to do this herself. When I took that brand, she said, I heard what you called out, what you offered. She looked at him directly. You said I was yours, that your pack would keep me. His expression shuddered. I was trying to protect you, to give you a shield against Malvek's claim. I know, and I'm grateful. She took a breath, steadying herself. But here's what I need you to understand. I didn't escape one cage just to accept another, even one offered with good intentions. Naya! Let me finish. She stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his eyes, the old scars that mapped his face. You're the Alpha King. I understand what that means, the weight you carry, the responsibility. But if we're going to do this, if we're going to rebuild the oath houses and change the North, then it can't be through the old ways. What are you saying? She lifted her branded arm, letting the bandaged limb rest between them. I'm saying when you knelt to me during the oath binding, you cracked something open. Something that can't be sealed shut again. You showed your pack that an alpha could bow without losing strength. That equality doesn't mean weakness. That was different. That was an oath between allies. Exactly. She held his gaze. So when you say I'm yours, when you offer your pack's protection, I hear the kindness in it. The genuine desire to keep me safe. But here's my answer, Kale Draven. She reached out, her uninjured hand finding his. Not yours. Ours. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Not possession, not submission, partnership. Ours, she repeated. The pack. The oath houses. The future we're trying to build. Not mine, not yours. Ours. Equal share, equal say, equal burden. For a heartbeat, she thought he might argue. Saw the old traditions warring with new possibilities in his expression. Then his hand tightened around hers, and he smiled. Not the guarded half-smile she'd seen before, but something real, and warm, and full of hope. Ours, he agreed. Outside, as if the pack had been waiting for exactly this moment, the wolves began to howl. Not in mourning or battle cry, but in celebration. A rolling chorus that built and built until the entire valley rang with it. Kale opened the cabin door, and Naya stepped out into the morning light beside him. The 100 wolves stood in formation, their rings perfectly aligned. And as she watched, they began to move. Not toward her or toward Kale, but toward both of them. One by one, each wolf approached, lowered its head in a bow that spoke of respect freely given, then moved back to its place. The youngest wolves came first, including the pup she'd saved, his injured paw healed now but still favoring it slightly. Then the warriors, scarred and battle-tested. Finally the elders, gray-muzzled and wise, their amber eyes holding knowledge of older times. They bowed to both, not to an alpha and his claimed bride, to partners, to equals, to a future that looked nothing like the past. When the last wolf had paid its respects, Kale turned to her. "There's a decision to make. We can stay here, fortify this cabin, make our stand. Or we go north, to the ridge. There are other oath houses there, abandoned but not destroyed. Places where the old stones still remember their purpose." He gestured to the moon plates, still glowing faintly inside the cabin. "If what my grandfather said was true, the plates want to go home. Want to be reunited with others of their kind." Naya looked at the cabin that had sheltered them, at the valley that had become a battlefield, at the blood-stained snow that marked where they'd fought for freedom. This place had changed her, had stripped away everything she'd thought she was, and shown her something truer underneath. But it wasn't home. Not yet. How far to the ridge? 3 days through the mountain passes if the weather holds, longer if storms hit. And Malvek? Will expect us to flee, but he'll also expect us to go south toward the kingdoms, toward what passes for civilization. Kale's smile turned sharp. He won't expect us to go deeper into the wild. She nodded slowly. Then we go north. We gather the plates, we find the other oath houses, and we start rebuilding. It won't be easy. The north is harsh, unforgiving. And there will be others who resist change, who want the old ways back. Good. Her branded arm throbbed and she welcomed the pain. It kept her grounded, reminded her what she was fighting for. Let them come. Let them see what happens when people choose their bonds instead of having them forced. Kale laughed, the sound bright and unexpected in the cold air. You're either very brave or completely insane. Why not both? He stepped closer, his hand cupping her face gently. That brand on your arm. In the old tongue, the symbol the priest burned, it was meant to mark ownership, to claim you as property. I know. But the moon plates, when they reacted to your pain, they changed it, added their own markings to the design. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Now it means something else. Defiance, choice, freedom earned. She looked down at her wrapped forearm, seeing for the first time the faint silver-blue glow seeping through the bandages. The moon plates had marked her as surely as the priest's iron had, but with an entirely different purpose. Will it always glow like this? Probably. Harkener marks usually do once they're awakened. It'll fade over time, become subtle, but it'll never completely disappear. He paused. Does that bother you? No. She flexed her fingers, testing the arm's range of motion. It hurt, but it worked. Let it glow. Let everyone see what it costs to choose freedom. Maybe it'll inspire others to make the same choice. They gathered what little they had. Naya's sewing kit, Kale's weapons, dried meat and water skins for the journey. Most importantly, they retrieved all 3 moon plates from beneath the floorboards, wrapping them carefully in oiled cloth. As Naya lifted the last plate, it hummed softly, and she felt something through the bond. A pull, a direction. The plates weren't just objects. They were compass needles, pointing toward others of their kind. They're calling to each other, she said. I can feel it. There are more plates, more oath houses. They want to be reunited. Then that's where we'll go. Kale shouldered his pack, then turned to survey the cabin one last time. Thank you, he said to the empty structure, for shelter when we needed it. For keeping the old ways alive. The fire in the hearth flickered, and Naya could have sworn she felt a response. Not words, but a sense of satisfaction, of purpose fulfilled. They stepped outside, closing the door behind them. The pack formed up around them immediately, taking positions that would protect their leaders during travel while still allowing flexible response to threats. Kale shifted, his body flowing into wolf form with practiced ease. The wound on his flank had healed to a thin scar. He was whole again, or as whole as a warrior ever got. Naya climbed onto his back, settling into the position that had already become familiar. 2 other wolves flanked them, close enough that their body heat helped ward off the cold. The sun had fully risen now, turning the snow into a field of diamonds. The northern pass stretched ahead, winding between peaks that scraped the sky. Kale began to move, and the pack flowed into formation behind them. 100 wolves moving as one, carrying the Hearthkeeper and their alpha toward a future nobody could predict. As they reached the edge of the valley, Naya looked back one last time. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from where Malvek's army had camped. They were still there, regrouping, planning their next move. Let them plan. She had wolves at her back, moon plates humming with ancient power, and a brand on her arm that glowed with defiance rather than ownership. She had an alpha king who'd learned to kneel, and a pack that had accepted an omega seamstress as their equal. Most importantly, she had a choice. And she'd chosen this path freely. No more claimed brides, she whispered into the wind, knowing somehow that the words would carry, would spread, would plant seeds in hearts that had forgotten what freedom tasted like. Only chosen bonds. Kal's response echoed through the pack bond, wordless but clear. Agreement, determination, hope. They walked into the northern pass, snow crunching beneath paws, the morning sun turning everything to light and shadow. Behind them, the valley fell away. Ahead, the mountains rose like promises written in stone. Somewhere in the north, other oath houses waited. Other moon plates called out for reunion. Other people, both human and shifter, lived under the weight of forced bonds and false laws. But change was coming, carried on the backs of wolves and the will of those brave enough to choose differently. The brand on Naya's arm pulsed gently, silver-blue light visible even through the bandages. Not a mark of ownership, a sigil of defiance. A promise of what was possible when people stopped accepting cages and started building doors instead. And as the pack disappeared into the mountain pass, heading north toward unknown futures and impossible dreams, a new law was born in the wild places where the old world had forgotten to look. No more claimed brides. Only chosen bonds. Always.